Hey, I'm Magnamund from Board Game Co, and today I'm doing a preview of Lone Wolf: Vengeance of the Kai. This is a sponsored preview, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below, and this is a prototype. All rules and components have to exchange, and despite the fact that it does look pretty great on the table already, there definitely are some prototype things that they already know are changing, from chip sizes to some art elements, small things like that, but this is very much in the prototype phase. But with that said, I'm going to try to give you a general overview of what you're doing in this game, how this game plays out, and then I'm going to specifically drill down into a few examples of types of things that can happen, things like combat, duels, questing, specific core elements of the gameplay, so that you can see them play out in a bit more detail. But as far as that general overview, you're playing a two-player game over here. You have the Freeland Alliance, that's going to be all these blue troops over here, and then you have the Darklords, which are all these red troops over here, and there are a lot of troops on the table. There's a lot going on. This is what the game looks like set up from the very beginning. You are diving into a world already entrenched in combat, with units from both sides, neutral units. A whole lot is going on before this game even begins. But you're going to start by having various leaders. Each side is going to have their leaders. The Freeland Alliance always starts with Lone Wolf as their core leader. This is the main character. Speaking of which, by the way, this is based on a book series. I probably should have said that. This is very much based on a book series. You might be familiar with the book series already. If you are, great. A lot of this will be familiar to you. And if not, this game might pique your interest in that series. But Lone Wolf, the core character over here, is always going to be one of the four leaders of the Freeland Alliance. Meanwhile, the Darklords are going to take two Darklords as well as two mortal leaders, and they're going to start off with those as the core things that drive your actions in the game. Your goal as the Freeland Alliance is to accomplish the quests of Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf has these 5 quests over here, and you can do one of these quests per round, and the game lasts 6 rounds, which means you have to make sure to achieve at least one of these in 5 of those 6 rounds, although there are various cards you can use to play a bit of a catch-up and possibly catch up if you didn't get to one in time. So you have 5 quests, 6 rounds to go ahead and accomplish those quests. And then you have the Darklords. The Darklords are trying to take control of these strategic territories over here. We have these boxes for them over here, but they correlate to specific zones on the board. For example, we have Elzian over here, which is going to be in the territory of Desi, where if combat occurs over here, if the Darklord is able to move their troops across the board and get control of this, that'll be one of the 9 strategic territories, and they need 5 of the 9 strategic territories in order to win. Should that happen, should Lone Wolf get his 5 quests, or should the Darklords get 5 of the 9 strategic territories, that represents an instantaneous win for that side. Alternatively, if that doesn't happen, you will play out the full 6 rounds, at which point there'll be a scoring element to try to give you points to different players, depending on the things that they achieved. Each side has their specific goals that they are working towards, and you'll play it out as a point-based victory if neither side achieved their goal. That's the overall idea of what's happening in this game. You're playing through an epic two-player adventure in which you're going to be taking actions in the game while attempting to accomplish your asymmetric quests. As far as the general turn structure in those rounds, you're going to be working with these cards over here. There are different cards for the sides over here. We have the 3 for the Darklords and the 3 for the Freeland Alliance. And then we also have these item cards for the Freeland Alliance as well. So there's going to be an extra set of cards that they have. But these cards represent some of the core things you can do on the turn, because your leaders in this game have 3 core things that they can do. The first thing they can do is you can place a leader in order to move troops around the board. We're going to have our leaders over here, and should you take a leader and place them out, you can place them into a territory. You will have stands for these, just so you can see them from the top cam over here. I don't have them set up in the stands, but you can place them into an area in order to draw adjacent units into that area, and if you do so, and then there are units from both sides, you will then resolve a combat. So for example, with the Darklords over here having this one territory in the middle of my sea of blue, that I do not want them to be able to establish a stronghold there, I might want to go ahead as my first turn, because the Freeland Alliance will start in rounds 1, 3, and 5, and the Darklords will start in rounds 2, 4, and 6, players alternating turns from there. So I might take a leader, place them down into the spot over here, in order to draw my units from those zones into that zone and have a combat ensue. That would be an example of a command action, which is again one of the 3 core actions you can do with your leaders. So command, you place a leader down, you draw adjacent units into it. There are a lot of other small rules. Some things, again, we're not getting into the nitty-gritty of all the rules, but there's lots of things to know about movement. You're going to have this various mountain range over here, which will block movement unless you're an aerial unit, and aerial units can carry other units over as well. There are going to be ships and aerial units that have carrying capacity, and so there's going to be things like that. There's going to be very swamp territories that will present a degree of slowing that players down, and again, either you have a way around it, or alternatively, you risk taking losses. So things like that will affect the general idea of movement, but the core idea of movement is you place down a leader, look at the adjacent territories and move units into that territory in order to draw combat or to get closer to where combat is. Again, small rules in play as far as adjacency, units that can move already, units that have already moved that round, things like that, but that's the core command action. The second action you can do is a commence action. And by the way, we will show you a combat so you can see a more detailed example of how that plays out, but I'm going to do that after going through the general game flow. The second action you have is a commence action. A commence action is where you're going to place a leader in order to play one of your cards. Because again, we start with various cards in the game. We have item cards, which give you various ways to do things. We'll show you some of those as well. And then we have these 3 different decks over here, and you have leaders that have different skills for how to play those cards. For example, King Sarnak III over here has a command of 2 over here for playing red cards over here. We have 3, which is going to be his health, and then we have blue and yellow for, again, those 2 different decks as well, and those skill levels determine what cards you can play. So let's, for example, say I want to play a conjure item card. This conjure item card, which is going to be a helpful thing to get items into my play at the start of the turn, and by the way, you're going to be starting with 2 cards from each of these decks, and so if I play this card over here, in order to conjure items, I could play this character over here, this leader. The problem is he only has a strength of 2, and this skill requires 3, which means I could play another leader alongside him in order to combine their skills in order to play a card. That is something you're going to want to think through whether you want to do, because you're effectively giving up a full action in order to do so. It's not always wise to do so. I'm trying to show you various ways things can play out in this game so that you have a better sense of how things can happen. But again, your basic idea of a commence action is you play a leader in order to play a card. Should we resolve this conjure item card, we would draw the top 3 cards of the item cards, we'd pick one, and then shuffle the rest into the deck. This could be a very strong way to get a good item early on, although again, whether you choose to play 2 leaders for that, that would be a different story entirely. So again, those are the 2 core actions you're going to be doing most of the time in the game. Playing leaders in order to command units into battle, and then playing commence actions in order to play these cards, which give you a host of powerful effects. By the way, I should note some of these cards will be played in battle, and some of them will be played as effects, like you just saw me play this conjure item card. The third thing you can do with your leaders is more of a response than an actual thing itself, and that is to challenge. Challenging is the idea that you see a leader doing something, you see your opponent doing something that you really think you need to stop. For example, this quest card over here, this is a very strong card. I kind of mentioned it loosely, but we have Lone Wolf, he's attempting to accomplish his quests, and that means if he can get quests done faster, he can trigger endgame before the Dark Lord player is able to get enough of a presence and get those strategic territories. This quest card, should Lone Wolf try to play it, for example, maybe Lone Wolf goes ahead and plays his character, in order to play this quest card, he has a skill level of 3, the quest card is 3, and he can initiate a quest now in the relevant territory. Must be played by Lone Wolf. This card is either a catch-up mechanic to get ahead of things, or sorry, it's either a catch-up mechanic in order to be able to get things done if you weren't able to accomplish a quest, or alternatively, play it early on and you're simply setting up the pressure on the Dark Lords because you have your quests done fast. Especially if you can get that in round 1, you can accomplish your first quest, getting your Summer Sword very early on because quests have rewards. We'll come back to that. But should I play that card right now? Should I play this quest card in order to accomplish a quest? It is in the Dark Lord's interest to probably try to stop me, and they're going to go ahead and choose Dark Lord Nag over here, and they'll attempt to challenge that action. You'll weigh up the specific attribute you're challenging over here. In this case, we're doing 3 over here, and you're going to roll your dice. So let's go ahead and start with the Dark Lord Nag is going to challenge. We'll roll 3 dice over here, and he has this over here, which is going to be 2 1s for the sake of a challenge, and the dice are different depending on what you're doing. But for the sake of a challenge, you'll have axes are going to be 2, and you'll have swords are worth 1, and you have shields being worth 1, and then blanks are worth 0. That is how a challenge action will play out. Because he rolled 2 swords, he has effectively 2 in the challenge strength. Lone Wolf is going to go ahead and respond. He's going to roll his dice as well, so let's go ahead and take 3 dice for Lone Wolf, and we're going to roll them, and we got a 1, unfortunately, which means the Dark Lord was successful in challenging Lone Wolf, stopping him from being able to play this incredibly powerful turn 1 card, which would have set Lone Wolf up for success by getting a quest done and the associated rewards on the very first turn of the game. And so again, those are the 3 core actions you're doing in this game. Once again, as a recap, you are playing a leader in order to command. That's going to have you moving units across the board based on where you play your leader. And then having a combat ensue, which we'll show you shortly. You can also play a commence action where you're going to play a card using that leader's skill value in order to play that card from these different decks that each player has. And the last action is challenging, which is when you see the opposing leader do something you really think is worth stopping, at which point you effectively play your leaders to use their skill values against them in order to challenge. Those are the core actions you're doing in this game, and each player is doing them in order to set themselves up for victory. Again, as the Dark Lord player, that's going to be trying to move your hordes across the board in order to get to the various points on the board, the various strategic territories, in order to get 5 of those 9 strategic territories, putting the pressure on Lone Wolf and the Freeland Alliance. And in the case of Lone Wolf, that's going to be trying to accomplish your quests, which often involves playing, well, certain cards like that, or trying to just stop the Dark Lord, making sure you have your units in place to repel those invasions, trying to get control of various zones on the board, because it's also going to be this income over here, which you're going to be using to recruit new units in the game, although you do need to control those territories. This is a good time to mention that control of the territories is not based on where your units are, or the entire board would be controlled at the very beginning. While these units are on the board and are available to both sides, control is going to be started at the beginning of the game, where you're going to have Lone Wolf taking control of the Sommerland over here, these 3 territories over here, and we have the Darklands, which are controlled by the Dark Lords, which are these 5 territories over here, and you're going to use control markers to indicate control of those territories. Control can also be achieved as you move across the board, meaning as you place your lords out in order to go, as you place your leaders out in order to gain control of those territories, you'll place control markers as well, and then also various cards can give you control of territories as well. That's going to be the core action phase, which brings us to the refresh phase. The refresh phase is what's going to happen at the end of each round after all combats have occurred. Oh, before we get to the refresh phase, we have the duel phase. The duel phase is where Lone Wolf has an opportunity to go ahead and pursue his duels. You're going to have these 5 duels that the Lone Wolf is trying to achieve. One of them, the Vengeance of the Kai, has to be done last. This is the very last one over here, and the victory, but the bonus over here is victory. You win the game if you accomplish this quest. The other quests all give you various things you're trying to do over here, and they'll give you various benefits that you'll have as you achieve these over here. So for example, the first quest, the Helgast over here, and I say first, but you don't have to achieve this first, but it's often recommended to do so. This will give you the Summer Sword, a powerful card that will go to Lone Wolf in the game, and this will give him the Summer Sword, which gives him extra strength in battles and duels. It allows him to slay various Dark Lord enemies as well if you win in a duel. So you're going to have extra benefits that the Summer Sword gives you if you get that early on. These other 3 will give you various bonuses. You'll track them on the Freeland Alliance's mat over here, but you can have various bonuses that will give you extra elements to Lone Wolf, bumping his stats in various ways as you achieve them. In this phase, Lone Wolf is going to choose a quest, which effectively represents a duel you're going to have against that leader. We'll talk a bit more about duels as we get into combats, because duels happen both in combats when you have leaders present, but it also happens when Lone Wolf in the quest phase is attempting to duel the various leaders, trying to match up his skills and attributes against them in order to hopefully defeat them and accomplish his duel, but also being mindful that it's not just about the various stats, it's also going to be about the various cards that both sides are going to play, and so ultimately you are trying to take those leaders out in order to accomplish your goals, alternatively risk being sidelined a bit as your leaders take damage and potentially have to recover. So, before we go into the specific examples, once again, a quick recap of all of that. You're playing through a 6-round game. In the game, you're going to have these leaders. One thing I didn't tell you yet is that as you go through the rounds, you're going to increase the leader pool and the amount of leaders you have. You start with 4 leaders, and you can lose leaders that will slow you down throughout the game, but otherwise, you're going to be increasing in your leader count at the end of round 2 and at the end of round 4. And so you have more leaders as you progress, and therefore more actions as you progress into the later rounds. You are using those leaders to command, to commence, and to challenge. Commanding is going to be moving units around the board, commencing is going to be playing item cards, and challenging is going to be, well, item cards, cards from your decks over here, and challenging is going to be trying to get in the way of your opposing players do that. The Freeland Alliance, Lone Wolf, is going to be doing that in order to set himself up, hold back the Dark Lords, and accomplish their quests. Meanwhile, the Dark Lords are trying to slowly move across the board, getting 5 of those 9 strategic territories. When you're done with the core action phase, you're going to enter a duel phase, which is where Lone Wolf has an opportunity to achieve his goals, and then finally you'll enter into a refresh phase, where you're going to be collecting various income from the various zones you control, and spending them on troops over here, both players having their dashboards with their various troop units over here, showing you what troops you can buy, which dice they roll in combat, how many units they carry in the case of ships and in the case of some of the flying units. And so you're trying to spend those on those troops to put more units onto the board to continue your, well, whatever your goals are, depending on the players. That is how you play through a game of Lone Wolf Vengeance of the Kai. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through a combat example as well as a quest phase so you can see a bit more in detail how some of these core elements will play out. And so I'll be right back with a combat setup as I show you that initial starting action I first took, where I tried to invade this territory with some of my units against some of theirs. We'll set that up and I'll show you how that will play out. So I have a setup for a battle over here. This was that initial invasion that I did with those units. I brought in 5 units. I have the 3 from the Darklords over there, and I have my 1 leader as well. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the things that can happen in a battle, but I'm going to also keep this one pretty straightforward, a little on the simpler side, so that you can follow, and some elements you'll also see during the quest phase. Now specifically, the very first thing that can happen in a battle is the defender can summon a leader to join the battle. This is effectively their action as a response to yours. You summoned a leader, you commanded, you brought units into battle, and they can commit a leader in order to have their own leader in the battle. Now they might already have a leader in that battle, especially if they've commanded and then you've commanded into there to respond, so you can have leaders already present, which is usually the best thing for the defender, because they get their leader without spending an action, without giving up an action. Alternatively, if they add a leader to the battle, if they choose to commit a leader, they're effectively giving up one of their actions that they could have used to command something else somewhere else, or to command somewhere else on the board. In this case, to keep it fairly straightforward, we're not going to have the defending, we're not going to have the Dark Lords add a leader to the battle, especially because they're a little overwhelmed and they've decided that giving up this spot might be better long term for their overall plans of dominating the continent. And so this one's going to only have a leader, a single leader, which means we're going to skip the duel phase of this battle. Because in a traditional battle, you could have, if there are leaders from both sides, you have the opportunity for those leaders to try to engage in a duel. You also have the opportunity to try to evade a duel if you don't want to be in a duel. There's several reasons why, for one side or the other, you'll want to be involved in the duel. The Dark Lord can capture leaders, the Freeland Alliance can sometimes, especially if you have the Summer Sword, you have the opportunity to potentially kill units. So there's reasons why sides might want to be in a duel and why sides might want to evade a duel. But you have the opportunity to, once there are leaders, for those leaders to commit to a duel and for them to try to evade it. We're going to be skipping that initial phase, so we're summoning a leader, we're going to deny, we're not going to get into leaders dueling, which means we're going to skip the duel round, although you will see how a duel plays out as we show you examples from the quest phase. But with that said, we're now going to go into the ability to play cards. Leaders in battle have the opportunity to play cards, which we're going to choose to do so now. Even though we are a little bit on the offensive over here, we do want to keep our units alive, so we're going to play deflect, which we can do so because their strength, their combat skill is equal or greater than that. We can play this over here, turning an enemy die, turn 1 enemy die this battle round. So we have that opportunity to play that proactively depending on how things roll. And with that, we're going to assemble the dice pool from both sides, with the attacking player assembling their dice pool first, which means we're going to look at this Freeland Alliance board and we're going to add up the dice from each side. We have a cavalry unit with 2 black dice over here. We're going to have 2 infantry with 2 black dice, and then we have an archer, 2 archers with 2 blue dice over here. We're going to roll this pool of dice and we're going to assign them, assigning combat markers to the enemies. We're going to assemble our dice pool over here, and we're going to roll it, trying to get it all on camera. We have a good amount of defense. The offense, on the other hand, is a little bit lacking overall. So if we take a look at the enemy units, we'll see that the enemy units over here are victim to all damage types, and we have 1 health for the Giak, and 2 for the Drakam and Vordak. We did not roll any axes. Axes will be unblockable damage, and so we're going to be able to assign those 2 shields. We'll hold on to 2 black shields in reserve over here, and we're going to assign these 2 damage. Let's go ahead and take out the Drakam early on off the bat. So although they are blue, which is going to help us because they don't have a lot of blue defense, and we could turn one even if they needed to, so we should be pretty safe taking out the Drakam. We're going to go ahead and assign both of those. We're going to add tokens over here and assign 2 blue damage to the Drakam. The enemy are going to assign their damage pool over here, so we're going to look at them, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they also have a 5th over here of blue, so we have 4 black, and then we have 1 blue, so we're going to take this 4 black, remembering we have 2 shields, and they're going to roll that defensively, and this is going to be that first round of combat, and they have, okay, so they have 1 defense over here. The defense won't help them, unfortunately, because of the fact that this is going to be blue damage. You have to assign like to like, and you can't do that, and this attack is not going to help them because we have 2 black shields. We don't even need this deflect to turn an enemy die, which means it was a bit of a wasted card, but we couldn't know how it's going to play out, and now they have this 1 unit gone, which is going to help us out in the next combat round. We're going to assemble our pool again. So again, we have 4 black and we have 2 blue over here, and we're going to roll those again. Second combat round. We are entering the second combat round. Again, if we wanted to, we could play cards right now, but we're going to go ahead and enter these, roll these. We have 1 unblockable damage and a whole bunch of defense. So we're playing a very defensive roll. We're going to assign that 1 unblockable damage to just take them out, hopefully. And then they're going to roll their pool, which again, they're going to have 1 blue. They have 1 black, and 1 blue. So we have that is going to be their dice pool. They might be able to damage us this time because, you know, we have the defensive roll, but they have an unblockable. So this will be defended over here, but they have an unblockable damage which they'll use to take out one of our archers. That's going to be that out. We have the Giek out, and now we enter into the probably the last combat round. So we're going to again assemble our dice pool. We have 2 for our cavalry over here. We have 2 for our there, and we only have 1 archer this time round. And so we're going to roll that. We're going to roll this over here, and we have 1 hit. Okay, so we have 1 unblockable damage, 1 blockable damage, and then 1 defense. They're going to roll only 1 and 1 this time, which means they still can defend depending on what they roll. And they got 1 unblockable damage. They'll be able to use that 1 unblockable damage to take out, again, let's say take out an archer over here. We'll take them out, and that's going to be how a combat round plays out. That would be a very vanilla combat round, a very basic combat round. You didn't see any duels. You'd have a duel round every single turn. We didn't see the opportunity to retreat. We also didn't see a siege happen. That's where effectively the attacking units can push the retreating units into a siege, into a castle, where you have to either attack again as the attacker, or alternatively, you have the opportunity for the defending units to have other allies enter the region to try to break the siege, at which point you have an interesting mechanic where on round 2 of the siege, the besieged units can sally forth to enter into the combat. So there's a lot of nuances that are going on here from the duels, from more card play, from items you can have played out in the combat as well, and then of course besieging and retreating. But that is a fairly basic example of how a combat plays out, which means now it's time to show you how a duel plays out. As a reminder, the duel phase is going to happen after all the actions are carried out in the game. What you're going to have is you're going to have a duel phase before you enter into the refresh phase. The duel is where you have Lone Wolf having opportunity to complete one of their 5 quests, with the Vengeance of the Kai being the very last one they can do. The others they can do in any order, but Helgast is often recommended as a first one because different quests will give you different benefits, but getting the Summer Sword early on is a very strong one. And so we are going to set up over here with Lone Wolf against Helgast on this dual track over here. We're going to use a marker to represent Lone Wolf's endurance points, which are going to start off as 5, and this is something that, again, we're playing out a direct duel as part of a quest right now. You basically have Lone Wolf summoning Helgast to a duel, but normally you can play this out in a general combat by having leaders duel each other just within a combat itself. Although when that happens, leaders engaged in combat can't actually play items or spells to the general combat instead. They're occupied by their own duel. That's something that would happen in a combat round. But in a duel, we do have the opportunity to play some things, and so we're going to have Lone Wolf's going to play, let's see, we're going to play a leader over here as our item, which will give us +1 combat skill for this combat duel, which means we'll be rolling 4 dice instead of our 3, which is helpful because we're already beating Helgast as far as the quantity over here, but better safe than sorry. Things can work out not in our favor, plus we don't know what cards they're going to play as well, which can further tip the scales of battle, which is a good thing we did so, because they're going to go ahead and play Power Crystal. They have the attribute to play that. It's a 1. They have that over there as far as their skill goes, and so they can play Power Crystal to add 1 blockable damage this battle or duel round. And so we have Lone Wolf's endurance points. We have the modifiers that are currently in play. Again, people can play it in further duel rounds, but we're going to start off over here, and we're going to have Lone Wolf rolling his 4 dice. So Lone Wolf's going to take his 4 dice because he has that increased combat skill, and we're going to see how much damage we can do against Helgast. We have 1 blockable damage, 1 unblockable damage, 2 blockable damage, and 1 shield over here. So we're going to assign those tokens as we enter into the next phase over here. So we have those against Helgast, and Helgast is going to add 1 blockable damage, and we do have that shield, so we could potentially block that, which is good overall, but they're still going to be rolling 2 dice, so we're going to go ahead and give them 2 dice to roll, and we have, well, nothing. That was excellent as far as Lone Wolf goes. That was excellent, which means they do have that. We're going to block it with the shield. Nothing happens to our endurance points, and I think we almost took him out. He's down to 1 health remaining, so we have that. We'll just leave this over here as markers, but he has his 1 health remaining from his 4 endurance point, which means we'll enter into the next combat round. A leader is still going to be in play because this is a combat skill for the combat duel entirely. This is for the battle or duel round, so the Power Crystal is going to be removed from play. It only had an effect that 1 round, which means unless we roll really poorly, this is a much quicker duel than it was a combat. We're going to roll our dice over here. We have 2 unblockable damage, which means nothing he can do. He is going to die this round, and we roll defensively 2 shields, which we're going to go ahead and have Helgast roll against us, and he was able to deal at least 1 damage to us. Again, the color matching isn't in place right now. This is just using the dice in general. So we're going to have a 1 unblockable damage, which will lower our endurance points, and then that 1 blockable damage will be blocked by our dice, and then Helgast is dead. And then we have the Summer Sword, which is what we got as a reward for defeating Helgast, and that's going to give us an additional dual die, which means we could have been rolling 5 dual dice if we had a leader, plus the Summer Sword, plus the stats. We could have been rolling 5 dual dice in a combat, and you have the ability to slay Darklords as an additional reward for having the Summer Sword when we take them out. that is basically how a duel plays out. Duels are going to give you the opportunity to bump up your stats, plus of course they are an essential component to actually winning the game as Lone Wolf. And so now you've seen a battle play out as well as a duel play out, and so now we can go ahead and close this off. That's the core idea of Lone Wolf Vengeance of the Kai. You're trying to achieve your unique victory, which is either going to be control of 5 out of 9 strategic territories as the Darklords, or getting those quests done as Lone Wolf as the Freeland Alliance. You're going to be taking actions with your lords, which will ramp up as the game progresses, starting with 4, but then going to 5 and then 6 lords you can play in order, leaders that you can play in order to take actions from commanding, commencing, and challenging. You'll be engaging in battles, you'll be engaging in duels, you'll be engaging in duels within battles, you'll be having sieges, you'll be sallying forth to engage in a siege. You have a lot of other elements we haven't fully explored, elements such as carrying units across various areas, how you deal with retreats, when you have units, battles in sea and units that need to retreat from there. We have undead forces. That's a whole element of the Darkland Alliance. We have undead forces that if you have undead present, that can give you the opportunity to even grow more of an undead army, so you have to be really mindful as to how undead battles play out and taking out the undead as fast as possible. There's a whole lot more going on here, but this is designed to give you a general taste and flow of how Lone Wolf Vengeance of the Kai plays out. Once again, I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. This has been a preview of a prototype with rules, components, subject to change. And until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this useful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.